Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on when you're watching. Today is day 4 of grade 5 social studies with Mr. Appel. It's been a pleasure these past few days to bring social studies into your homes, and I've enjoyed it. I hope you have as well. Today we're going to continue talking about government, but I want to start with an update. This is filmed last night, so this is what's going on right now. First of all, the cloture vote did not happen as planned in the Senate. 4 Republican senators, Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, Ben Sasse of Nebraska, Tim Scott of South Carolina, and Rick Scott of Florida, not related to each other. 4 senators realized they did not like the deal that had been reached at 1:30 in the morning on Wednesday. They say that it would give too much money for unemployment, meaning people who lost their jobs. They would get too much money from the government. They would get so much money, in fact, that it might actually make them not want to go to work. They would just sit at home and collect the unemployment money. This goes back to what we were talking about yesterday with the differences between Democrats and Republicans. A lot of Republicans are not comfortable with giving out huge amounts of money to people, even people who are in need. The Democrats heard about this, the 4 senators, and one in particular, Bernie Sanders, who you all know, because he's a candidate for president. Bernie Sanders is a senator from Vermont. Bernie Sanders said, if they really don't support the unemployment, then I'm not going to vote for the bill either. So the Senate bill is not finished as of last night. And the Dow Jones, the stock market, the top 30 stocks there, the Dow Jones did go up 495.64 points. However, at one point during the day, it was up by almost 1,200 points. But due to the Senate not acting, the stocks took a dive late in the afternoon. The stock market closes at 4 o'clock. So the economy is really depending on this bill being passed in the Senate and then eventually the House. So let's look at today's learning objective. What are the different levels of government? Now, what we've been talking about recently is the federal government. The federal government is responsible for the whole country. The executive branch of the federal government is the president and all the people who work for him, like the vice president and the cabinet, which are all the different department heads. They're called secretaries, Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury. And then, of course, the legislative branch of the federal government, legislative branch, is the House and the Senate. So we've been talking all about the federal government these past days. But there's 2 other levels that we haven't spoken about: the state level and the local level. The state level, the executive branch, is not headed by a president. The executive branch is headed by a governor. All 50 states have a governor. As you can see, all 50 states, they have their own governor who's in charge of their own state. So for instance, New York State, we have Governor Andrew Cuomo, who's been governor for almost 10 years. He took over in 2011. New Jersey has Governor Phil Murphy. Connecticut, their governor is Ned Lamont. So all of these governors, they need to work together, even though they're from different states, to coordinate because we're all neighbors. Governor Wolf in Pennsylvania, Governor Baker in Massachusetts. We have to cooperate with all the different governors. Also on the state level is a legislative branch that makes laws just for each state. We have the state assembly and the state senate. They make laws just like the House and the Senate make laws. They give their laws to the president. The state assembly and the state senate, they give their bills, which become laws, to the governor. And it works the same way. Just like the president can veto their bills, the governor can veto state bills. And where does this all happen? In New York State, it happens in Albany because that's the capital of New York State. Every state has its own capital city where the governor lives and does his work. So, for instance, Texas, the capital is Austin. So the governor lives in Austin, Texas. And the capital of Louisiana is Baton Rouge, and Mississippi is Jackson, and so on and so on. Every state has its own capital with its own governor. And then we get down to the local government. The local government, those of you watching who live in a city, like my students, we have a mayor. The mayor is the head of the executive branch of a city. If you live in a town, you may have a town executive or a county executive, or you may have a village mayor. It depends on what type of local place you live in. But we live in a city, so we have a mayor. And we have our own legislative branch called the City Council. They have 51 members, and they meet in City Hall in Manhattan. And just like they give their bills to the governor and they give their bills to the president, the City Council gives their bills to Mayor de Blasio. Now, on the local and state level, everything is run by Democrats here in New York State. The City Council, the mayor, the State Assembly, the State Senate, the governor, everything here is Democrat. Obviously, it's more complicated on the federal because the House is Democrat, the Senate is Republican, the president is Republican. But what happens across these three levels? What if the mayor wants to do something, but the governor says, don't do that? And the president says, who has the final say? Technically, the president does, because he's in charge of all 50 states. But it would be impossible for the president to be in charge of every little thing that goes on. So the local things are taken care of by the mayor. The bigger issues, the state, there's the governor, and the federal is the president. I'll give you one example during this crisis, which affected us. The schools. Some people said we need to close the schools immediately because of the COVID-19 outbreak. Mayor de Blasio waited until Sunday, March 15th. Some people say the governor, Andrew Cuomo, wanted to close it earlier, but technically the schools are run by the mayor because he is in control of New York City. Other things like the subway system in New York City, the MTA, is actually controlled by the governor, okay? And then if you wanted to go, say, to a federal court, even if it's in New York City, that federal court would be part of the federal government. So they would determine if the court stayed open or not. So it's a little confusing. Local government, state government, federal government. Today, there's not going to be an assignment because you've all been doing so much work in all your different classes. But what I want you to do is, after watching this video, come up with some questions, some wonderings, as we call them. What are you not sure about in terms of local government versus state versus federal? And also, later today, I'm going to ask you to watch some of these press conferences. Each level has been giving press conferences every day. Mayor Bill de Blasio, Governor Andrew Cuomo, and President Donald Trump. Sometimes they give their press conferences at the same time. Like yesterday at 6 p.m., they were on at the same time. So I'm going to ask you again to try to watch a press conference to see what happens. 2, any questions you have, any issues you're confused about with these three levels. And then we're going to talk about them in our classroom chats today. So there's no assignment. You just click on this link and you've watched this video. Come up with some questions to bring to the chat room so that we can have a nice discussion in the chat room. All right? Thanks for watching Lesson 4 on the United States 3 levels of government. I hope it was informative. As always, wash your hands, cover your cough, stay safe. We'll see you next time.